We gather again on a beautiful Sunday in this welcoming place. There's something so comforting to find ourselves together once again, surrounded by smiles and open hearts, old friends who have known each other for years, intermingled with new friends whose possibilities are pondered in the future tense. Live Oak is a spiritual home dedicated to celebrating and nurturing our diversity of thought, our generosity of heart, and the search for truth and meaning in our lives. Reverend Tamara Casanova Suzuki is away this week, but she will be back next Sunday. And today, we are delighted to welcome Reverend Lee Marie Sanchez. Reverend Lee Marie has been a religious professional for 23 years, beginning as a director of religious education, and then a chaplain for 2 large medical centers in Washington State. She received her Master's of Divinity from our Unitarian Universalist Seminary, Meadville Lombard Theological School. She has preached in over 36 Unitarian Universalist congregations across 3 states. Lee Marie is currently the minister of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Laguna Beach. Welcome, Reverend Lee Marie.
I'd like to thank all of you for inviting me here today, and of course, Reverend Tamara has been a longtime friend of mine, and I stay with B. Hamlin when I'm here, and there can't be a more wonderful, gracious host than B. And Marty took me on a tour yesterday. We went to the Church of the Beatitudes, which was a lovely experience. If you haven't been there, you might want to try it, women priests. And then we went to Casa de Maria, which was another delight. I had never been there. I know a number of retreats happen there, and Unitarian Universalists go there for those, as well as a number of other people. And then we ate at the Nugget, and that was great. Yeah, I mean, I had the real Santa Monica. Where am I? Goleta and Santa Barbara tour. And I also want to thank Jim. He's been wonderful to be in communication with to set up this service. And John is magnificent, as you all know. What do I have to say about that? Leslie's voice just, wow, she just, I just am so excited about hearing the music. And in fact, sometimes I say that the sermon is just the icing on the cake. It's really the music that people come for. And in this congregation, yeah, that's right, I can see that. So, and Eric's back there doing the sound, and Linda was here this morning, and we've got wonderful musicians. This church has got it all. You guys are fantastic. I love coming here. Yeah, to you, yeah. Spirit of love, spirit of life, our hearts beating together in this present sanctuary of souls. We who are the inheritors of more than 400 years of Unitarian Universalist history, torchbearers of freedom, reason, and love, spirit of life, please be present with us at this hour. As we gather always in a wider search for truth and purpose, may we greet one another with open hearts and open minds. Let us comfort one another by our presence here. May we cultivate both wisdom as well as compassion. Let every person who comes into this sanctuary today see a welcome face and hear a kind word. Let us speak the truth to one another in love, as we feel the essence of love in our search for true harmony. Come, let us worship together. It's time now for us to move into a space of quiet meditation, prayer, or reflection, each according to our own practices. Gently close your eyes now. Place your feet on the floor to ground yourself to Mother Earth, or sit in any way in which you are comfortable. Take a deep breath in and let it out long. Take another deep breath in and let it out long, long, long. Now, breathing naturally, let your tongue touch the top of your mouth, the tip of your tongue touching your upper teeth. This will allow your face to relax. Relax your whole body. Let the tension melt away from your head, down your shoulders, down your arms, to your fingertips, as you let it all go. Let us experience a deeper connection. Tap into the stillness and silence and follow your breath in and out as you become one with yourself. Just rest in this feeling now. No more, no less, no judgment as you breathe in and you breathe out. In the present moment, naturally, thankful for being right here and right now, just the way you are. You are loved just the way you are, right here and right now. This morning we will be exploring our faithful freedoms and responsible choices in regards to reproductive freedom. Certain sensitivities may be touched by what is shared this morning, but know you are safe here in our sanctuary together. If you would like to speak with me briefly after the service, I invite you to do so and/or to share this later with Reverend Tamara. Let us rest in the stillness of the moment in some quiet now as we simply breathe together. It was the late 1940s. She was 41, the mother of 4 grown children and a grandmother of 2 little grandbabies, working full-time, wife of an immigrant man who suffered from the machismo of his culture. His own fears, his own doubts and struggles here in America. He was a hard worker and he was a good man, but he could be abusive when he was scared and when he was angry, and he was sometimes. So she didn't tell him. And since abortion was illegal, she talked to a friend of a very strange friend, who took her to a back alley abortionist in a seedy section of Los Angeles. The women in her family knew about it, and so did her young adult sons. But she never talked about it with anyone else. Religion didn't play anything into this decision, and I feel so sorry that she didn't have the spiritual community to support her in her decision. She was my grandmother, Mary Argentina Fernandez Blanco. It was the late 1960s. She was only 21. She'd been married a few months when her doctor told her she had a food-borne illness, contracted while she was on her honeymoon. He gave her some kind of serious medication, which probably caused the spontaneous abortion in the middle of her 2nd trimester. Not well informed anyway about her pregnancy, she only had this little booklet that he had given her, the doctor, but she had a lot of fear. When she had lost the baby, she had been in labor for hours at the home of her parents. Her husband wasn't around. She barely made it to the hospital. A nun in the hospital came to say, "We're ready to baptize your baby now." The young woman was furious. She had eschewed her Catholicism when she was a young girl. "You will not do this," she said to the nun, and she requested that the nun bring her baby. The nun did as she was requested. The young woman, a Unitarian Universalist, silently said a little prayer for her lost baby. It was only the young woman's grandmother who didn't make light of her losing this potential child, this potential family and future for herself as a mother. Everyone else said, "Oh, it's just as well. You'll go back to work. You won't even remember this. Everything's going to be okay." But her grandmother knew. She knew well. But her grandmother, her granddaughter, didn't know of her grandmother's story until many, many years ago. The granddaughter was me. That young woman was me, Lee Marie. It was the early 1980s, and now she'd been married more than a dozen years. And she very much wanted a child. Her biological clock was ticking. When she went to the doctor, she brought such a long list with her of questions that the doctor called the receptionist and said, "I think you better cancel my next 2 appointments. I have to answer a lot of questions for this young woman. It's going to be a long one." And he did. And he told her that her age, and with some history of mental retardation on both sides of the family, she had a pretty high percentage of having a developmentally disabled child, either physically or mentally. The doctor highly recommended amniocentesis, a test to check an unborn baby for certain genetic disorders or physical abnormalities. But she refused the test. No matter what, she wanted to have this baby, and she would love it with all her heart and all her mind. So for her, abortion was out of the question. She could understand it for others, but not for herself. So no tests. Her father was beside himself, worried about her future and the future of her unborn baby. The baby was early, only an ounce over preemie, but he grew up to be a healthy young man. He's 6'2.5" His name is Andrew. He's my son, and he lives in Washington State with his 3-year-old son, Trent Patrick. Enter the 21st century, now the early 2000s. She's working in a Catholic hospital as a chaplain, me. My supervisor was a former practicing Catholic priest. In one of their weekly meetings, he asked, "What would you do if a young woman came to this hospital and said that she wanted to have an abortion?" And I was aware that I was in a Catholic hospital and that wasn't possible there. And I was afraid of losing my job as a chaplain. I said, well, I'd inform the patient of this, that she could not have an abortion at the hospital, but I wasn't sure what else I could say. Much to his credit, my supervisor, the former Catholic priest, married to a former Catholic nun, asked, "What would you do if this was not a Catholic hospital?" I answered I'd get as much information as I could to this young woman so she could make an informed decision for herself. And I would hope that she would be informed and that she would have people around her to support her in whatever her decision was. My supervisor now, his teeth gritted, his jaw clenching tightly, practically yelled at me and said, "Yes, of course. What kind of minister would you be if you could not follow the dictates of your conscience and your faith tradition? And even if she were here in this hospital, if she decided that she wanted an abortion, damn it, you'd take her across the street to the community hospital, and you'd stay with her, and you would do everything for her that you just said, and you would stay there, and you'd make sure she had the best treatment possible." What an amazing lesson. I learned a lot that day about my assumptions about all Catholics, like yesterday, which was a great experience. But most of all, my calling to my true conscience, to my faith tradition, to my faith in freedom, reason, and tolerance, and my willingness to speak the truth in love. The next year, when I was doing my year-long chaplaincy residency at a large suburban community hospital, not a religious-based hospital, I was called by a surgeon to talk with a young couple. The doctor knew I was a Unitarian Universalist, and he knew that the young couple were fundamentalist Christians, very conservative. But the surgeon knew that this chaplain would speak the truth in love to women on the special births unit where I was serving. The couple had been told that their unborn child, in the nearly 3rd trimester, just a little bit older than my baby that I had lost, was terribly deformed, with severe abnormal brain injury. Their little one could well have been born alive and would likely suffer a long time, only to be kept alive by medical machines and then to die, never having been a viable human being. The couple was submerged in grief, not only for the long impending loss of a long-awaited child, the first in their family, but also because of their religion. They were deeply troubled that they would be going against their God. They were told by their pastor that they would be sinning if they made that decision. I carefully asked them, "Tell me about the God you believe in." And they told me God was a loving Father who would care for them no matter what. I assured them they had done everything they could for a healthy pregnancy, but bad things happen to good people. They were good people, and their God loved them. They also loved their baby, and whatever decision they made would be because of that love, heart and mind and soul, wanting to avoid his suffering. I stayed with the couple in complete amazement at the technology, as well as the compassion of the doctors and the technicians, all the hospital staff that attended them, as the three of us watched together the last ultrasound, which showed their unborn baby, heart beating, body parts recognizable, but his little brain floating outside of his body. Then we all prayed together. We said tearful goodbyes. And I left the room, and the doctor performed the procedure, and their little one died. The young couple was submerged in grief even more deeply than I can imagine. Grief and loss counseling was provided to them, and they were encouraged to share their pain only with those people who loved and supported them in making that loving decision. Of course, these are just a few of the stories. But it's also important to share the stories. They are unbelievably complex, every one of them. Many are heart-wrenching. All point to the fact that women are capable of making their own informed decisions, have the right to their own spiritual beliefs and their own understanding of whatever they might call God or the holy. In 2009, a column in the Orange County Register focused on a local retired obstetrician gynecologist, and he shared his story, recalling the horror of illegal abortions in the 50s and the 60s. He said, "I worked in a hospital in Los Angeles then, which was home to the infected obstetrics ward, dedicated to treating women who had suffered the ill effects of back alley botched abortions. Doctors there worked 16 hours a day, treating women for septic shock, kidney and liver failure, and gas gangrene. Some of these back alley abortionists took a straightened wire coat hanger, encased by a rubber tube, which they inserted into a woman's vagina, resulting in such blood loss and infection, the patients died. Some women resorted to self-abort, inserting tablets of caustic chemicals into their vaginas, but instead of inducing an abortion, they would corrode the vaginal skin, causing hemorrhaging and infection." The retired doctor who was interviewed for the column said, "I concluded that women are going to get abortions regardless of the law, and I didn't think it was fair that the law should deprive these women of decent medical care. Most patients were afraid to tell their doctors how they had tried to abort. In fact, although some women talked to others about what they were experiencing, many did not. Later, I talked to my mother about this. She said Grandma wouldn't have dreamed to talk to me or share her feelings with anyone else. But none of that matters now. It was so long ago. But we shall see, it does matter. We all know it matters, even in our presidential election today. And while I can't say the names of those candidates, you know them, and you know the platforms of the parties as well, so we do need to talk about it. This January was the 43rd anniversary of Roe v. Wade. This was a Supreme Court decision that decided on legalized abortion in 1973. According to the Roe decision, most laws against abortion in the United States violated a constitutional right to privacy under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The decision overturned all state and federal laws outlawing or restricting abortion, which were inconsistent with its holdings. This has been one of the most controversial and politically significant cases in the history of the Supreme Court. Roe v. Wade centrally held a mother may abort her pregnancy for any reason up until the point which the fetus becomes viable. The court defined viable as being potentially able to live outside the mother's womb, albeit with artificial aid. Justice Blackmun, acknowledged his awareness of the sensitive and emotional nature of the abortion controversy, of the vigorous and opposing views, even among physicians, and of the deep and seemingly absolute conviction that the subject inspires. He also recognized there were many theological opinions about this issue, differences which no court should be in a position of deciding for anyone. The majority of the court decided finally on the right to privacy. Now, many of you may know this history, but you may not know the history I will be sharing with you now. How much the Unitarian Universalists have been involved in women's right to choose for over 100 years, and that we are directly involved in the Roe v. Wade case. As a person who's completely pro-choice myself, I was never more proud of when I learned this history, and many Unitarian Universalists, I've preached this in probably a dozen congregations, most of the congregations do not know this history. Some. In 1915, yes, 1915, Unitarian woman Margaret Sanger, crusader for family planning, coined the phrase birth control, and she founded Planned Parenthood. As early as 1963, the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations in our General Assembly began to pass a series of resolutions to support the right to choose contraception and abortion as legitimate expressions of our constitutional rights. Long before abortion was legal, Unitarian Universalists were helping women secure safe abortion options. In the mid-1960s, many UU clergy joined the Clergy Consultation Service on Abortion. In the Pacific Northwest area, in the very town of Tacoma, where I was later to serve as a hospital chaplain, Unitarian Universalists worked with a registered nurse referring patients to care in Vancouver, British Columbia. The ministers there helped women raise money and provided them safe passage to Canada. In some places, women set up their own clinics in their own homes to provide registered nurses to dispense information and those new contraceptives that women were requesting. In the 1970s, and this is the one that most folks don't know, the Women's Alliance at the First Unitarian Church in Dallas, Texas, decided to spend a year studying abortion. The congregation's leaders encouraged a young attorney named Sarah Weddington to pursue the case of Roe v. Wade as it began its journey, first through the Texas court system, and finally 3 years later in 1973 to the Supreme Court, which was to decide that abortion was legal. If it hadn't been for the women in the basement of the Dallas UU congregation, we might not even have Roe v. Wade today. Isn't that pretty amazing? Doesn't that make you feel like Ladybug Girl? Since legalization of abortion in 1973, UUs have continued to work for the justice issue to make sure all women have access to abortion services. Many UU ministers and lay people provide pro-choice religious presence at abortion clinics. I'm sure that you have heard in the past there were people that were the escorts who were killed. Those were Unitarian Universalists, ministers and lay people. And we continue to demonstrate around the country when we can. There's hardly been a UU church in which I preached this sermon where I did not meet women who over the decades have been on the front lines in working towards reproductive freedom. I have listened in awe to the stories of many women, mostly in their 70s and 80s and even in their 90s, to tell me about their personal experiences, either with abortion or their political involvement in this area. UU churches have collected funds to offset the high cost of the procedure for poor women who do not have health insurance or whose Medicaid will not cover this due to the infamous Hyde Amendment, which forbids federal funding for abortion, with a few exceptions. UUs have agreed with the World Health Organization that reproductive health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being in matters relating to the reproductive stages, in all stages of life, and that all people should have a satisfying and safe sex life, to be informed and have access to safe, effective, affordable, and acceptable methods of family planning of their choice, with the right to appropriate health care services for safe pregnancies and childbirth. In our long list of Unitarian Universalist general resolutions, and you'll bear with me because it's important for us to know, we resolve that to educate ourselves and the public to assure federally funded age-appropriate sexuality education, OWL, for all our children, including information on abstinence, birth control, and abortion, focusing on the emotional and social responsibility involved in sexual activity and parenthood. And we oppose any move to restrict or deny government funds as a way of restricting counseling and services, and we oppose all legislation intended to circumvent Roe v. Wade. And we desire to expose bogus clinics which infringe on our right to choose. The delegates at the 2012 General Assembly in Phoenix, Arizona, and maybe some of you were there, I was, selected reproductive justice, expanding our social justice calling to be the 2012 through 2016 Congregational Study Action of the UUA. So many of you know, but it bears repeating, and we need to keep reminding ourselves that until we see progress and success, that the supposed pro-life movement has worked to chip away the choices we have as women. So yes, let's be aware that half of all pregnancies that occur in the United States are unintended. Women spend 1/3 of their life avoiding pregnancy. Most Western European countries cover abortions and contraceptives in their national health programs. All the while, they have lower abortion rates than the United States. This one kills me every time I read this. Today, 87% of U.S. counties have no abortion provider. That's a huge swath of this country. Nearly 1 in every 5 hospital beds in the United States is now operated by a religious entity, many of which prohibit performing or even talking about abortion, contraceptives, or AIDS prevention. The U.S. has the highest rate of teen pregnancy and the highest transmission of STDs in the Western world. Our Unitarian Universalist position is that we are part of a free religious tradition with a deep and abiding reverence for life, but we recognize life is lived in relationship. Moral decisions are not made in a vacuum, and such decisions can be very difficult, oftentimes for grieving and profound senses of loss. Our faith tradition stands for freedom, equality, and compassion. We believe decisions need to be made faithfully and responsibly in a moral way to what a woman perceives is holy and just. Women are capable of subtle and sensitive moral discernment. Yeah, the so-called pro-life movement, so-called, does not embody this nation's moral values. We need to let our liberal and progressive voices continue to be heard. We are following in the footsteps of many of our courageous forebears, but we still have a lot of work to do. Every one of us here is connected. We're all affected by our nation's laws. For our daughters, our sisters, our mothers, for all of us, we continue to need to act. A choice which cannot be exercised in a safe, accessible, supportive, and affordable manner is no choice at all. Thank you, my friends, for listening to my story, the stories of my family, and the proud story of how Unitarian Universalists have worked and will continue to work to ensure that all women have the opportunity to have their own unique and special faithful freedoms and responsible choices. Amen, Yamein, and blessed be. Wisdom comes when we reflect on our lives and make choices based on honesty and truth. Wisdom lives within us. Listen to her. Trust her. Talk to her whenever you need to. She is your friend.